This is Tim Selgo, author of Anchor Up, Competitive Greatness the Grand Valley Way. And if you want to maximize your potential for success, then I recommend subscribing to the Success is a Choice podcast with Jamy Bechler.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And today's guest is used to asking the questions, but today he will have to answer some questions. Daniel Hare is the host of the All-Star Leader podcast. He has interviewed some big guests, including former Congressman J.C. Watts, Orlando Magic co-founder Pat Williams, the College Football Playoff Committee chair Kirby Hocutt, and the New York Times bestselling author John Gordon, just to name a few. Daniel is a former NCAA Division II athletic director. He now holds the position of Director of Career Development for Baylor University's Law School. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Jamy, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Daniel, we mentioned some things in the intro, but could you please fill in the gaps and tell us a little bit more about your professional journey as you've been a college athletic director and you're now with Baylor's Law School? Those are definitely different types of jobs.
Sure, and I appreciate the opportunity to share. You know, I think the probably overarching theme as I tell briefly that journey is something that, I know is often on a lot of people's minds as they're evaluating their own careers, which is, life happens, and you can't, I don't think, separate out, people I think try to separate out life and career and this balance stuff. And I think what I've found is that they're intertwined so much that you just really have to kind of, be dealing with them at the same time, and they impact one another. And I think that's what you'll see as I just talk about this, I graduated from University of Oklahoma in 2000 and was all keyed up to do college basketball coaching. That's what I wanted to do. So I was on staff at OU as a student manager, then a grad assistant after I graduated, and spent some time there. And after doing that for a few years, figured out I thought that athletic administration was kind of my gifting, where I thought I'd be best at. I did a lot of work with the athletic department administrators while in that role at OU. And so I eventually went down and got a job in the athletic department at Baylor in 2003 to raise money, work in fundraising, and I did that for several years. I always had going to law school is something that I thought would be helpful on my journey, something I was interested in, would kind of separate me from the cluster of folks I saw, with master's degrees, with bachelor's degrees, and I also thought it was something I could use later in different capacities. And so I went to law school at Baylor, always wanting to pursue the athletic director track. And so when I came out of law school, I did NCAA compliance work for just a year, actually, at a Division II school, Central Oklahoma, back in my hometown of Edmond, Oklahoma, before getting an athletic director position. You referenced it, out at Western Oregon, and a great eopportunity, earlier than I would have expected, for sure, to have that chance to go out and become an athletic director. We just had a great time out there, and did some, I think, really awesome things that the student athletes there, the coaches, the administrators and staff, I just can't say enough about them. And I'm so proud of all that they accomplished while I was out there, and what we were able to do together. And after having our daughter, my wife and I, we married while I was in law school, but after being out there for a little over 2 years, we had my daughter, and she had some health issues in those first 6 months of after being born, and my wife had some health issues as well. And basically what it came down to was, for the health of our family, we needed to get back closer to our families more generally. And so we started trying to figure out what that meant. And, I've only been doing this for a few years here at Western Oregon, but I kind of had to, make a decision about what was more important at that time. Family came first, and as it does today, and so gave up the athletic director position to move back to Waco, where our family was, my wife's family was, and to try to get everybody healthy and get kind of back on track. And so wasn't looking to leave athletics, but as I said at the beginning, life is part of this, and family's part of this, and I know a lot of the people I've interviewed, athletic directors and athletic administrators that I've worked with and become friends with over the years, are always dealing with this issue of family and work, and it's just so time consuming, and so everybody deals with it in their own way. For us at that time, it was to come back here, and so the law school where I'd gone at Baylor here had a great opportunity to work with students, and more importantly, help find connections for them in the work world, which was very challenging after the recession of 2008 and 9. The legal field really got demolished in a lot of ways, and so it's been a challenge, and that's kind of been one of my themes as well everywhere I've gone. I came to Baylor in 2003, kind of following a lot of major situations here with the basketball program in the summer prior to me joining, and then when I went to Central Oklahoma, they were coming off major infractions in football, and then Western Oregon had its challenges, and then came here during kind of a very challenging time as well. So I tend to follow challenges, I guess, and really enjoy kind of rolling up my sleeves and digging in and digging out of those things, and that's what we've done here as well. And fortunately, we've had just 2 incredible years with our law students here getting employment, top 25 rankings in employment for the last 2 years, which is amazing. And they're just doing such a good job. And so, very different stuff. But at the same time, a lot of what I've also learned is it's so important to, be doing something with the people that you want to be doing it with, and among and with institutions that you want to be associated with as well. As I've gone and spent time in a number of different organizations. I mentioned some of them. I didn't mention all of them. But that's another thing I think too is, you want to, I think, surround yourself with people and opportunities that are exciting for you and empowering for you, and that's what we've been looking for as well. In addition to making sure our family's in the right place, and so there's I'm sure a lot more we could dig into on all this, but that kind of sets the stage for what got me back here and what we've been doing since then.
Well, you have one of the best podcasts out there. I recommend it to everybody in athletics, whether you're a coach or administration in some capacity, the All-Star Leader podcast. Now, you've had over 50 episodes. What have been some of your more memorable interviews or even some things that have surprised you as you've gone forth and interviewed these top-notch people in the athletics field?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, when you kind of, as I did kind of thinking about this conversation we were going to have, I was looking back at the different episodes that I've done, trying to think through, who stood out and what's, and it's, I think what surprised me is maybe some of the ones that I wasn't as sure about going in, or maybe not that I wasn't sure, but I just didn't know how they might go, or where the direction that they might go in, how they wound up, coming about. So, like one example is I really enjoyed a conversation with a guy named John Rossman, who was a high up executive with Amazon, and we just went through. He had a book out at the time, and we talked some about that, but just kind of the leadership principles from Amazon, and it was a little bit out of my realm because it wasn't really a sports angle to it so much, although he had some workings with NBA on some different product type deals. But just actually kind of going through what a company like that with the leadership they have does to kind of make Amazon what it is. It was, I think, really awesome stuff. I mean, I just kind of going through that book with him, and I really like the applicability of things like what stands out to me just as we're talking here about that one is their hiring process. And I spend a lot of time on hiring here, obviously at the law school, and so it comes into my podcast quite a bit. And just how people go about making decisions when it comes to hiring. And, they would have, just the amount of interviews that they would put people through, the types of interviews they put people through. And then they would have people that their whole role was to basically just say no. Basically, if they and had total power to do so. So they had these few people in each department or whatever that ultimately were the kind of the last ones to see them or whatever. And so a person could have made their way all the way through a set of interviews and gotten to the end. And if one person, this one person that's designated, were just to just not think it's the right thing, they could just call it done, and they wouldn't hire him. And I thought it was just really remarkable. I think there's so many, books and articles and research out there about just how much cost is involved in hiring and firing, especially, and things not working out and transition costs and all that. And so I'm always interested in how those processes can be better and, what we can learn. A lot of the listeners I have are in college athletics or athletics administration or whatever. And so I think if we can pull things out from other industries where they've really been able to hone some of that, it's interesting. Of all the ADs that, I've interviewed, I think probably still Joe Castiglione, who I've looked up to for a long time at the University of Oklahoma and is among the best in the business for sure, is one that stands out. They just have had such a history during his time there of excellence across the board. And it was just really good to be able to kind of dive into what he's thinking and doing on a day-to-day basis to make that happen, because they have definitely created a culture within their administration about how they're going to operate, how they're going to do things. I think just one example I can think of is when it comes to football. They've been scheduling high-profile September games for a long time. There was a long time, and more of them are doing it now, but it's because it kind of became a thing and all that. But Oklahoma's been doing it for a long time, and basically, they took the risk of you lose a game in September and that can knock you out. But he and Coach Stoops together, had made a decision that no, we're going to play the best, and we're going to set up our schedule so that both our student athletes get that experience of playing those types of games, because that's what they came here to do. And then also it's a great test of who we are and where we need to go and how far we are away and all of that. And and it's great for the fans obviously as well. And so just different things like that. That stick out to me. But and the last one I'd mention, and then we can talk about others if there's others that you want to ask about. But I got to interview my high school football coach, Blair Philbrick, a few months ago, and that was probably one of my most enjoyable ones. And it happens to be also one of the most listened to episodes of the show. It's funny because there's nobody outside of the circles around he and I that would really probably necessarily know who he is or want to tune in specifically to hear him. But we just were able to, I think, dive into some very, personal situations that we experienced together, but, pull out a lot of really neat, lessons from that. And so I was as surprised as anyone that it's been listened to as much as it has. And so that's another one that surprised me and stood out as well.
Well, you do a great job in terms of your interview style. You also do if anyone goes and looks at your episodes, you have notes, very detailed notes on it as well. So if you're a reader, you can definitely read through those notes, and it's been great. And you introduced me to a number of people there just through the podcast. John Rossman was one of them that you mentioned first. She reached out to him, and he actually sent me that book. I believe it's called The Amazon Way. We'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, you're right. It was a great book for culture. And I actually use some of the excerpts of that when I go and talk to sports teams and businesses about culture. So I wouldn't have had that without your podcast and getting connected with John. So I definitely recommend to people, checking out Daniel's podcast. It's good, especially for athletics, but even for business people as well. As you look at your guests that you've had, and you've talked to so many top-notch guests, what are some common traits of success? What are some things that you kind of see across the board that stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think of all that I talk to, I literally have the schedule and the list right in front of me. I'm just looking at all their names and well, what they do, where they are, and you know what? I would say one of the things is these are great people. I'm just kind of looking down this list here. I mean, these are really, and I know, obviously I know some of them very, very well, grew up with some of them, I mentioned my high school football coach, know him, and then there's others that I don't know, except for the conversation on the podcast. So I'm generalizing a little bit, but of the ones that I know and, well, and the ones that I know a little bit, just, good, kind people. Sometimes we try to make things complicated and sometimes they're not. I think, just the ability to care about other people, to have empathy, for other people is a big deal in leadership. And it sometimes gets overlooked for things that are a little bit more flashy, like having great vision, or being, a great executor, or, great strategic thinker or something like that. But, ultimately is, as you know well, or your mentor, John Maxwell, talks about, leadership is really just influence, and that it's really challenging to influence if people don't feel like you care about them. And what I see on this list is a bunch of people that care about other people and care about the people that they lead, and make it a priority to show those people how, both in word and deed, how they care for them. Beyond that, I see people on here that are incredibly hard workers. The ones that some of them I've had a chance to work with. I'm looking at Stephanie Grace, her name here, who's with the NCAA, but I had hired her at Western Oregon to come in and be our compliance director. She quickly we promoted her to senior woman administrator and assistant athletic director. And it was clear she was a superstar from the beginning. And we unfortunately weren't able to hold on to her, but she's moved on to bigger and better things now at the NCAA. But, I just to think about her work ethic and to go along with how much she cared, particularly about the student athletes that she worked with, and that their future was kind of in her hands in a lot of ways sometimes, as it can be with a compliance director at a school. And so, just incredible work ethic on her part. I think about a Scotty Rogers, who I got to know when I was in law school. And I worked at what is now CBS College Sports. It was CSTV at the time, but he was doing sales for them, and I was a law clerk that summer, and we've stayed in touch. But he is a relationship master. I mean, he knows everybody. He's the guy that at the conventions and the conferences will go and just sit with a table full of strangers, and by the end of the day, he'll have 8 new friends. And not because he's just trying to make contacts, but because that's just the kind of guy he is. People want to be his friend, and he wants to be their friend. And I mean, I could go on and on about these guys and gals here, but those are some that stand out.
You had J.C. Watts. I imagine you're pretty partial to him, considering he was a star quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners. But he also was a congressman, and when you had him on, I thought he had some very wise and mature things to say, and a different perspective that in our politically charged world nowadays, and it seems like it seems like so many people are on one end or the other extreme, and they refuse to look at the other person's point of view. I thought J.C. Watt had some interesting things to say about how we're all in this together, and that you really have to root for people to do well, because that means we all do well. But at the same time, you work for change and you work to make things better. And were there some things that stood out with his interview? And I will definitely put that in the show notes, because I thought that was a very good interview that you had with J.C. Watts.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, that's an interview that I worked a long time to get. I thought when I first started the show, of the people that I wanted to have, at the top of the list, he was on there. And so I was so thrilled that he was gracious enough to join the show. And I'm looking at the date here, and I interviewed him on November 15th. The show aired a little bit later than that, but I interviewed him on November 15th, which was, a couple of weeks, I guess, after the election. And yeah, I know and recall well what you're talking about with his thoughts on, that as a nation, I think his analogy was an airplane, and that we're all on the plane together. And, this was post-election, so now it's over. Donald Trump's the president-elect at the time, and that rooting for him to fail or rooting for him to whatever not do well is basically like being on a plane as a passenger and rooting for the captain to fail. You're not going to do that. You need the captain to fly the plane, or you all go down. And so I think that was where he was coming from, and I recognize completely that for 8 years, and on the other side of it, that the argument would have been the other way, and the left and the Democrat people would have all said the same thing about where was that attitude when President Obama was in office? It seems like you guys were all rooting for him to fail, and so I think this cuts both ways, but his sentiment, I think, was the right one, and the true one, in rooting for your leaders to succeed and do well, I think for him, as an African American and one of the first to represent Congress from Oklahoma, he became, I want to say, the second highest ranked House member behind the Speaker of the House. I think he was the House Majority Leader for the Republicans kind of during his peak. And by the way, stepped away before he had to, which is an unusual thing, which I appreciate. And I think I complimented him for in the episode that he voluntarily left and kind of treated Congress as not a career, but an act of service for a period of time, which I think used to be the case and was the way we were set up. But we've gone a different direction as a nation since then. But yeah, I mean, I think he obviously has disagreements with the way in which the president had handled himself during the campaign, and a lot of his policies, I'm sure, as well, but that ultimately wanted to give him every benefit of the doubt and support for him. Who knows what he would say today? That was 10 days after the election. But yeah, a very fantastic conversation. And I thought a lot of good insight in his relationship with Barry Switzer. And when I didn't know the story as he told it, where as a freshman he was wanting to leave school, leave the team, and had essentially quit, before Coach Switzer essentially talked him back onto the team, and just kind of the level of respect that he had for Coach Switzer, which Coach Switzer had earned with him over time of recruiting him and then coaching him in that first year. I thought it was a really insightful conversation as well, just to see how coaches and players interact as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as he talked about Barry Switzer and even his maturity through the years of playing at Oklahoma, he just struck me as somebody that had developed wisdom and discernment, and that he had opinions. He had, certainly he disagreed with President-elect Trump, and I'm sure, you mentioned what would he think now. I'm sure he disagrees with some or many of the policies now, but he does strike me as someone that's wise and discerning, and doesn't have his life controlled by emotion and just going with the party line necessarily. And we see that so oftentimes right now is that wisdom and discernment gets thrown out the window, and we just want to act rashly or act with emotion. And that really impressed me with J.C. Watt, and we'll definitely make sure we put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. He was special. And I'll mention one other piece kind of related to that just came up this past week. Through kind of a random circumstance of events that are too, much to go into for this, but wound up this, I guess 2 weeks ago when Oklahoma was here in Waco to play Baylor in football, wound up at dinner with some of the OU staff, and Joe Washington, who was a All-American running back for Oklahoma, an NFL running back, was in the game of the century against Nebraska, all this stuff back in the 70s. He's part of the Oklahoma administration as the letter winners executive director, and he was there, we were having a conversation about what players used to have to do in practice back in the day, when there was like punishments or different things like that in terms of running and whatever. And it was funny because this is no joke. We're at dinner, and Joe Washington said, you know what? I don't remember exactly. Hang on one second. And he pulls out his cell phone. He dials a number, and you just hear him say, "Coach, hey, it's Joe. Yeah, hey, did we run these 5, whatever sprints at 5 in the morning, like they're saying here? We did. Did I run those? Oh, I didn't quit. They just had this little conversation, and it was Coach Switzer on the other line, and just that kind of. I mean, speaking to more about Coach Switzer now, and relay back to JC. Just that relationship that he has with these guys. And I think all the great coaches, have that. But that's, that's leadership. I mean, that's not about, wins and losses, and it's not about, NFL deals and all this. It's about investing in someone else's life, for the long haul, that 30 years, 40 years later, they're calling you up, asking you about, something from back then. It just really stood out to me as just how cool was that, and I mean, how many coaches out there who are in the prime of their career right now that, when they're retired in their 70s and 80s, wouldn't want to get that call from a player that they coached 30, 40 years ago, from dinner on a spur of the moment. I mean, that's just the coolest thing, right? I mean, and it just, yeah, I mean, it's just one, and that's, I think why, I think that's why, as people in athletics and coaches, like, we all get into this, is for that. And sometimes that can get warped, and sometimes we lose a little bit of focus on what it's all about, and all that. But it's those relationships are what it's all about. And the wins come, I mean, the wins just come, when the relationships are first, and your players and the people that you lead believe in you and believe you care about them, and you have you have the ability to communicate a vision and do all those other things. Like, the wins just come, but that relationship piece is just so important, and we can't lose sight of it.
You mentioned that you had to work a long time to get JC Watts on your show. Who are some of the other guests that you would love to get on your show? Maybe a bucket list, so to speak.
Yeah, from day one, Coach K was definitely on the list, and have not been able to get that one done yet, but definitely not giving up. There are others like that. I think what I've going through this process of doing this podcast, JC is a good example, but something that I've just really kind of learned, I think, over the course of this has been, patience and persistence. Those are kind of the two things that I've been really holding on to throughout the process, is that I want to be persistent and not give up and keep going and keep asking and keep trying. I mean, I'm just looking here. There's a list of, oh gosh, I've got 10 or 12 here that have at one time or another in the last year had said yes to be on the show. And we just haven't been able to, find the right time, or just hasn't happened for whatever reason. And, 2 or 3 months into it, I probably would have gotten frustrated with that. And I would, of course, love to have had all of these scheduled by now. But now I just treat it as, patience and persistence. Like I keep going back. Hey, let's schedule this. When can we schedule it? Blah, blah, blah. And you're going to probably start to experience some of that as you get your show going, that people say yes, and then you just won't hear from them and all that. And so I'll encourage you now to have that patience and persistence as you go out and book your guests, because people get busy, people forget, they say yes when they really probably wanted to say no, and then they just delay, different things like that. And so I don't think there's any guest that I'm afraid to reach out to, or wouldn't want to have on that I won't just kind of persistently go after. I'm thinking about who's on my list here. Condoleezza Rice. How awesome would that be to get her on the show? I've had a number of conversations with people around her trying to get her on the show, and I'm not giving up on that one. Hey, Pat Williams is on here. I got to cross him off. I got him on the show. You did too. Heath Schuler played quarterback for Tennessee. He's been a congressman, played for the Redskins. I think he would be great to have on. Literally my list is 300 long here. So I continue to just plug away at some of these, and I know some of them will take years, if ever, but that's okay. And we just, I think the audience is forgiving in that, and also are very grateful, as I am, for those that do agree to share their time with us.
Where can people connect with you or find out more about you, Daniel?
So the podcast is probably the best place. It's over at allstarleaderpodcast.com. It's also in all of the iTunes and all the podcast directories that you might listen to. My contact information is on the website as well, but I'll give a direct email address to your audience. It's just daniel@allstarleaderpodcast.com. That comes right to my inbox, and happy to listen. Happy to hear from any of your listeners who might have questions or just want to visit, chat, whatever. And I'm on Twitter as well. It's just at Daniel Hare, and have a LinkedIn profile. And I've been more active on Snapchat lately because funny enough, we've figured out here that our law students are more, responsive or paying more attention to Snapchat stories than they are blogs or emails or anything else. And so I have been working on my Snapchat skills so I can communicate with our law students. So if anyone's on Snapchat, it's Daniel_Hare on Snapchat. And if you'll forgive me the occasional toddler video around our house, there'll be some other, I think, hopefully stuff you could take away from what I shared with the law students on there.
Other than your own, what podcasts do you listen to?
Yeah, and I don't listen to mine, so I get it out there and move on to the next one and hope it's good. No, but you know what? On podcasts, I kind of have a mix. So we talked a little politics earlier. I listened to the Slate Political Gab Fest, which I enjoy. It's a weekly show that I think people are interested in politics. It's a good one to listen to. Entree Leadership is a really good one. Ken Coleman hosts that. I had Ken on my show as well. That's a Dave Ramsey organization, a podcast, and Ken now has his own show, which I have not had a chance to listen to yet, but I'm sure it's fantastic, and I wish him all good things with that because he's a really good guy. I like Startup as well, is another one that is if you're a business person, you like business, this is a really good podcast to kind of just go through different businesses at different stages and issues they face and how they make decisions. And it's I think a really good show. It's funny. I was thinking through, is there a sports podcast I listen to? And right now there's really not. So if anyone has a sports podcast that they really like, I am open to recommendations for that, because I was looking through, I was like, I really don't have a sports podcast that I listen to, but I also listen to most of what Gary Vaynerchuk puts out. You and I have talked about him before. He's if you can get past the salty language, which he would admit drives some people away, then he's I think got a lot of great enthusiasm and great ideas, particularly if you're trying to advance your social media presence or personal brand or just motivation towards working hard. I think he would be a good one for that.
And we'll put your contact information in our show notes so they can send you recommendations for those sports podcasts.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jamy. Thank you so much for coming on my show now a couple of times, and happy to do this for you, and hope all of your listeners really dive in and spend their time with you, because I know your podcast is going to be great.
I absolutely love listening to Daniel Hare's All-Star Leader podcast and recommend it to anyone, even if you're not associated with athletics. Daniel does a good job of asking questions and booking big-time guests. Thank you for listening today, and if you liked this podcast, please share it and let others know about it. One of the best ways to do this is to take a moment and leave us a 5-star review. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of a podcast. Thanks again, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?